soldier returned in a coffin. The only person who asked to go with him was denied boarding without any clear reason. Right in the country they once fought to protect, the airline would soon regret this mistake. Atlanta International Airport, 6:28 in the morning. The intercom echoed through the cold, bright space of Terminal 4. A long line of people stretched before the check-in counter, all with tired faces rushing distracted. No one paid him any attention. An older black man stood silently in the crowd. He wore an old military uniform, the shoulders faded from wear. His cap was tilted slightly, revealing thin streaks of silver hair at his temples. In his left hand, he dragged a military green suitcase with a worn handle and a few dried mud stains. In his right arm, he held tightly onto an object. Not a bag, not any sort of document, but a wooden picture frame. The frame was plain undecorated. Inside was a young man in combat uniform, offering a slight smile, his eyes serious. The background was a desert, dry and empty. In the top right corner of the picture, a small black ribbon was taped on, a symbol of mourning. The man walked slowly, merging with the line approaching the counter. He did not push, did not rush. His eyes did not search for anyone, as if he knew exactly where he was going, what he was doing, and why. A young female employee typed something into her keyboard, then looked up as he stepped forward. "Good morning, sir. May I see your ticket or booking code?" The man nodded without a word. He gently placed the frame on the counter, then pulled from the breast pocket of his uniform a yellowish, tri-folded document stamped in red. The top line read, "Military Escort Authorization, Special Clearance from the Department of Defense." The young woman took the paper, frowning slightly. She was not used to handling this kind of document. A bit confused, she turned and walked toward the internal inspection area, leaving him there, standing alone. He was not frustrated, not anxious. He simply looked around. Across from him was a row of waiting chairs. A little boy was sleeping, slumped against his father's shoulder. To the left was a coffee shop, its lines stretched out like a conveyor belt. To the right, through a large pane of glass, the runway was slowly coming to life, like a scene in slow motion. Someone behind him muttered, "What's the holdup here?" He did not turn around. He stood still, a quiet marker in the noisy terminal. The employee returned, whispered something to a colleague. That colleague picked up the phone. No one made eye contact with him. He continued holding the picture frame, his face expressionless. Only his thumb trembled ever so slightly, not from the cold, but perhaps from not having stood among so many people for a long, long time. Suddenly, through the glass, a military vehicle appeared, slowly towing a coffin draped in the American flag. No one else in the terminal seemed to notice. No announcement, no ceremony. Only him and the coffin. His eyes locked onto it, unblinking, unmoving. A young woman nearby happened to follow his gaze and saw the coffin. She shivered slightly, but the man did not move. It was as if he had already known it was coming, as if he had arrived ahead of time, just so the person inside would not have to arrive alone. A few minutes later, the intercom announced Flight 1072 to Charlotte, now boarding at Gate B14. Passengers, please proceed to the gate. The crowd began to shift. He remained where he was. The employee looked at him, her lips parting as if to say something, but she held back. Outside, the coffin continued to move toward the cargo bay. A light breeze swept through the hallway. A second of stillness, and then that image, the man standing still, clutching the photo with the coffin gliding silently behind him, was etched into the eyes of those who happened to see it. But no one asked anything. No one said a word, not yet knowing that in just a few minutes, this silence would turn into the center of a storm. His name was Harold Bennett, 64 years old. It sounded like any other name you would hear in the American South. Not grand like a general's, not glamorous like someone remembered in the pages of history. But among veterans, the name Harold carried a certain kind of weight, the kind that no one needed to explain, but when mentioned would earn a silent, respectful nod. Harold enlisted when he was just 19, not out of a sense of duty, but because he needed to escape the dusty town where he was born, a place where every sweltering summer young men either landed in jail for fighting, or worse, vanished into cheap drugs. The first person who taught him discipline was a white sergeant, strict to the point of cruelty. The second was the battlefield. Harold had once been part of an armored unit in Ramadi, helping to clear neighborhoods overrun by armed fighters. During one ambush that lasted more than 8 hours, his vehicle was hit 3 times. One teammate died instantly, another lost a leg. Harold survived with a piece of shrapnel permanently lodged in his left shoulder and a long scar down his back that still ached when the weather changed. But he never talked about it, never complained. When he returned home, Harold did not wear his medals. He gave no speeches, never once bragged about being a veteran. The only things he kept were his old uniform, the same one he was wearing that morning, and a small wooden box that held all his military paperwork. That box stayed in the 3rd drawer on the left of his desk. In his lifetime, he had only opened it 3 times. Harold never wanted to be a hero. He just wanted to be someone who kept his promises, to the ones who had walked beside him through blood and dust. And that was why he was at the airport that morning. Not for a vacation, not to visit anyone, not because of any orders from above, but because in his heart there was a war that had never ended. Not a war between soldiers and enemies, but a long, quiet war between memory and forgetting, between those who came home and a society that had long since stopped remembering they had left. After he was discharged, Harold did not choose to live in a peaceful suburb or a veterans-only neighborhood. He could not afford it, and he did not need to. He moved into a 1-bedroom apartment on the ground floor in a neighborhood in southwest Atlanta, a place where the sound of ambulance sirens echoed through the windows almost every day, and kids grew up with gunshots in the background every night. Harold never married, had no children. His family was all gone. His closest friends from the military had either died in battle, drifted away, or returned as people he no longer recognized. He lived alone, simple enough that no one bothered him, but dry enough that every day passed the same, quietly and neatly without change. His job was fixing coffee vending machines. Not a certified technician, not on any long-term contract. He was just someone who knew the work, hired by a small company that serviced gas stations, hospitals, and schools. The best part of the job was that no one asked questions. People just wanted hot coffee that came out smooth and not too bitter. Who fixed the machine or what he had been through? Nobody cared. Each morning he started at 6 o'clock, driving a beat-up pickup truck that was parked behind an abandoned car wash. In the truck bed next to tools and replacement parts, there was always one thing Harold brought with him: an old radio. The last thing he had kept from his days at the barracks. When that radio buzzed with its familiar static, he knew he was still alive, still holding on to some small piece of the past. Even if it was just noise, he needed nothing more than that. Then Marcus came along. Like one of those quiet surprises life sometimes sends your way without warning. He was one of the new recruits assigned to the Border Training Center, where Harold worked part-time after retiring. He was not on the official staff, just helped train rookies, teaching them things that were not in the manual: how to unjam a weapon, how to move without making noise, how to read the look in a teammate's eyes. Marcus was different from the others. He was not loud, did not try to stand out. Just 18, thin, dark-skinned, with a face that always seemed like it was apologizing to the world. Harold noticed him right away. He arrived alone with no luggage, but a torn backpack and a wrinkled letter. In his file under next of kin, there was just one line unknown, raised in the state foster care system. Marcus was not the kind of person who drew attention, but also not someone easy to dislike. He did everything slowly, but carefully. He did not talk much, but he always listened. In the training unit, he was always the first to arrive and the last to leave the field. When others gave up, Marcus kept running, not to win, but like he was afraid that stopping meant being left behind forever. Harold saw that, not with pity, but with the recognition of a soul that had gotten used to living with nothing to hold on to. One weekend afternoon, Harold called him over behind the training field. They sat on a weathered bench. He did not ask anything, just handed the boy a bottle of water and said, "If you do not have anywhere to go, stay here as long as you can. At least here people know your name." That was the first time Marcus looked at him differently. No longer guarded, no longer shy. Just a quiet flicker of gratitude, light as a breeze, but Harold felt it deeply. From then on, Harold became a kind of silent godfather in the unit. Not official, not declared. But if a rookie needed advice, a bandage, or someone to show them how to reassemble a weapon after failing, they came to him. And Marcus came the most. He never said much, just stood nearby, watched, then tried again from the start. No one imagined that a few years later that quiet boy would lie in a coffin draped with a flag, and the only one who asked to go with him would be the man who once taught him how to fasten his helmet. Harold had never had children. He had never even thought of himself as a father. Being a person was already hard enough. Being a father, he believed, was too much if you could not promise to stay. But Marcus was different. He did not need to be taught manners. He did not crave attention. He just needed someone nearby, someone to keep him from getting lost. Harold somehow stepped back so Marcus could step forward. He never bought him things, never gave speeches. He just showed up. Once, when Marcus was punished with laps for not reassembling his weapon in time, Harold did not interfere, but he stood in the rain holding water and a dry towel. No one told him to. Another time, Marcus lost a handwritten letter from a girl in another state. Harold found it, folded it neatly, and left it on his bed, unsigned. To others, these were small things. To Marcus, they meant everything. Harold understood. He had once been the boy no one asked about. Bit by bit, the line between instructor and student blurred. Marcus started sharing things. The team he liked, how he hated early mornings, how he had nightmares of dying in a room with no windows. Harold never answered with deep words. Just a nod, a hand on the shoulder, a gentle squeeze. And sometimes that was enough for a rootless soul to finally begin to grow roots. Family does not need a birth certificate. It only needs to be nurtured with presence, at the right time, without judgment, without promises. And Harold, through his quiet, did exactly that, as if it came naturally. No one asked him to be a father, but when Marcus said, "If I die tomorrow, I hope you will be the last one who still keeps my photo." Harold knew you do not need to have children to become a father. Then came that afternoon in late June. The phone rang while Harold had his head inside a jammed coffee machine at a small transit terminal. On the other end was a stranger's voice, dry and brief. Someone from the regional military office. Private Marcus Brown. Killed in action in Syria. No family has come to claim him. Harold said nothing, did not ask questions. He closed his eyes for a few seconds, then simply said, "I will go." No one assigned him the task. There was no official order, no special mission. Just a notification call, usually ending in a standard military procedure, the body boxed, shipped to the local office, handed over, paper-signed case closed. But Harold could not accept that Marcus, someone he considered flesh and blood, would be returned like a parcel. So he went to the receiving office and requested a body escort permit, a special form meant for soldiers or close relatives of the deceased. He had to explain himself over and over, fill out forms, meet strangers. One of them asked, "Are you his foster father?" He just shook his head. "No, but I am the only one left who knows who he was." No one stopped him, but no one helped either. Airfare paid for himself. Lodging, transport paid for himself. Uniform. He had only the one, cleaned carefully and folded sharp like the day he first received it. He did not ask for support, did not post online, did not tell anyone, not even his co-workers. He submitted the papers in silence, waited for approval, then held the stamped copy in his hands, like it was a piece of the young man's soul, the one who once called him family. And so that morning, Harold stood at the airport holding the frame, waiting to accompany Marcus on his final flight. No one told him he had to, but he knew. If he was not there, the boy would have to go alone. And for Harold, that was the worst thing a father could let happen. The special military escort authorization had been issued 3 days before the flight. There was no photo on it, no QR code, and it was not connected to any commercial booking system. It bore only the official stamp from the Department of Defense and a single handwritten note. The bearer of this document is authorized to accompany the remains of a fallen soldier in accordance with honorable escort policy. No ticket required. Harold had used one of those papers before, years ago when he escorted a fallen comrade home for burial. Everything went smoothly. No one questioned it. But he had forgotten one thing: the world had changed. In today's system, everything ran through digital protocols, scanning tickets, verifying codes, cross-checking databases. People like Harold, who did not book through a website, who did not have an app, who had no reservation number, barely existed in the commercial airline system. But he did not know that. Or, if he did not think it mattered. Because in Harold's mind, a red stamped permit from the Department of Defense was enough to accompany someone who had died, at least enough to make sure he did not have to be alone. That morning, Harold put on his old uniform, polished his leather shoes, tucked the picture frame into the lining of his coat, and called for a cab to the airport. No one came with him. No one came to meet him. He only knew one thing: Flight 1072 would depart at 7:25 in the morning from Gate B14. Marcus's casket would be loaded through the rear cargo gate, while Harold, as the escort, would board like a regular passenger. So he stood in line like everyone else, waited his turn, pulled out his documents, handed them over. Not a trace of doubt in his expression. But tragedies rarely begin with a loud crash. They often start small. A frown from the clerk, a vague shake of the head from verification, and a question that kept repeating itself. "Do you have a ticket confirmation code?" "No." Then the system cannot verify you as a passenger. That was when Harold began to sense something was wrong. And that was when the real tragedy quietly opened the door behind the silence. It all unfolded like it had been pre-scripted. Not out of cruelty, but out of an indifferent routine that could still break a man's heart. After nearly 10 minutes of waiting, the young agent returned. She avoided his eyes. Behind her stood a man in a suit with a small name tag, Airport Operations Manager. His face was not cold nor unkind, just held that neutral expression of someone trained to be professional, efficient, and impersonal. "We are very sorry," he said, "but our protocol requires all passengers to have a valid ticket code. Your escort permit is not recognized by the civilian airline system as a valid boarding credential." Harold said nothing. The man continued, "We understand this is a unique situation, but in order to pass through security, you will need a reservation number or direct military contact verification." It was the same language, carefully chosen from the vocabulary of a system built to avoid responsibility. None of them knew Marcus. None had ever heard Harold's name. They were just following procedure, and that was the saddest part. Harold took a step back, not out of anger, not out of defeat, but as if he wanted to hide the fact that his eyes were beginning to redden. He turned his head, and in that moment, his gaze landed on Marcus's casket being slowly rolled toward the tarmac. No bugles, no sirens, no crowd to see him off, just a transport vehicle moving slowly, towing the heavy, silent metal box. A few ground crew members standing nearby removed their gloves and bowed their heads, a quiet habit whenever they saw a flag-draped coffin. But Harold did not bow. He just stood still. His grip on the picture frame tightened, as if letting go even slightly would shatter it, and with it, everything left of the boy he had once considered his own. He took a deep breath, then reached into the chest pocket of his uniform. Fingering the worn fabric, he pulled out a small item wrapped in soft leather, his old service insignia badge. He stared at it for a moment, then stepped back to the counter and gently placed it on the desk. The manager looked up. The young agent flinched. Harold looked at them, not with anger, not with blame. Only one thing showed in his eyes, the sorrow of a man watching honor pushed aside. Because there was no QR code, he spoke slowly. "I am not asking for special treatment. I do not want anything free. I just want to accompany him. One flight, one promise, one soldier who has no one else." No one responded. No apology. No one met his eyes for more than a second. Harold bowed his head, picked up the badge, and turned to walk away. His back was straight, but it was clear. He carried a weight no words could describe. A quiet shame carried for those who lived on. He had not gone far when a soft voice called, "Sir?" He stopped. A white woman, a little over 50, in a long ash-gray sweater, had been standing nearby the whole time. She had not spoken, not filmed, not asked a single question. She just stood there, as if waiting for this moment. Her face was bare. Her eyes were bright but tired, the kind of tired that comes with loss you learn to live with. Her voice was calm and real. "Are you the family of the person in the casket?" Harold turned around. His eyes were damp, but his voice was steady. "No, but I am the last one who knew who he was." She did not answer at once. Her gaze moved to the photo frame in his arms, with quiet respect, then to the badge in his hand, and in that instant, something passed between them. Not pity, recognition, the silent kind shared by those who understand loss. She stepped back slightly and took out her phone. Before filming, she snapped a photo from a distance. Harold, the old suitcase, the photo frame, and the tip of a plane's tail beyond the glass. Then she hit record. She walked slowly toward Harold. "I am sorry. I am not a big-time journalist, just a freelance reporter," she said. "But this needs to be seen." Harold said nothing but gave a faint nod. Not of agreement, of permission. She filmed. He stood silently. A man in a faded uniform holding a picture denied the right to accompany someone he saw as a son. An airport guard approached to stop her, then paused. Her eyes were not hostile, just the look of someone who knew that silence now might cost something sacred. Within a minute, the live stream began. Shaky, unedited, real. The frame showed a black man in uniform holding a picture walking away after being refused. No apology given. The caption read, "The young soldier returned in a coffin. The last person who loved him was held back for not having a ticket code." No music, no editing, just her voice, soft but firm. He was not his father, but he was the only one who wanted to go with him. The video spread instantly. On Twitter, people used the hashtag #LetHimFly. On TikTok, short clips circulated. Many showed just a black screen with one sentence, "He once fought for America. Now America says he is not qualified to see a fallen soldier off." Within 10 minutes, the video had over 60,000 views. By 7:25 in the morning, the scheduled departure time, The number had passed 100,000, but it did not just happen online. Right there at the airport, the effect began to ripple. No shouting, no protests, just a silence that started to spread, a silence full of weight. A middle-aged man in a leather jacket cradling his young son put down his bag and said loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "If someone like him is not allowed to go, then who among us can still be called an honorable citizen?" A young woman, wearing a military backpack standing in line, stepped toward Harold and said softly, "I just got discharged. You probably do not remember me, but I remember you. You taught us how to read battlefield maps. If you cannot get on that plane, then I am not getting on either." People started to take notice. Phones came out. Not to film, but to call. The press military offices people they thought might be able to do something. An older woman wearing a Gulf War Veterans Association badge walked up to the counter and raised her phone. "I am calling my lawyer, and my state representative's office too. Do you really want to make this a national story?" The gate agent began to panic. The manager behind her was on the phone non-stop. Gate B14, a place meant only for boarding, had now become a stage-drawn taut between honor and indifference. People did not need to know the full story. All they had to do was look at Harold standing silently holding that frame. And that was enough. Enough to know something wrong was happening. And if no one spoke up now, there might be nothing left to believe in tomorrow. A young passenger stood up and said clearly, "If he cannot fly, then I am not flying." Another added, "He is not asking for special treatment. He is just keeping a promise, something we have all forgotten how to do." One person stood up then, another. There were no chants, no banners, but every word they spoke, every look they gave Harold became the kind of pressure no airline was ever prepared to handle. No one at Gate B14 remained seated. A few passengers pulled out their wallets, took out their boarding passes, tossed them onto the counter and said, "I do not need this flight anymore." The ticketing agent looked like she was about to cry. The manager had made his fifth phone call in just 10 minutes. His face could no longer maintain its neutrality. Now it clearly showed helplessness. 7:31 in the morning. Over the intercom, the announcement came, "Flight 272 to Charlotte is delayed. We apologize for the inconvenience." As soon as the speaker went silent, so did the entire gate area, not because anyone was satisfied, but because everyone understood the silence of one man had brought an entire system to a halt. Harold looked up. He said nothing. He just held the picture frame a little tighter in his hands. Not to fight for fairness for himself, but because finally that boy would not have to fly alone. A few minutes later, a man in a gray suit appeared, wearing an ID badge that read Operations Director. He was not alone. Behind him were two senior staff members, a legal representative, and someone from internal security. He walked straight up to Harold without pretense, held out his hand and said, "I am the one directly responsible here. I would like to speak with you. Privately." Harold looked at him, not coldly, not warmly, just a nod. The two of them stepped into a side hallway behind the counter away from the crowd. No cameras, no live streams, just a conversation between someone trying to keep things under control and someone who had nothing left to ask for. The director spoke briefly. "You're escalating this issue to higher departments. At the moment, we still cannot allow you to board." There was no apology, no admission of error, just a printed internal document that read, "We are currently reviewing procedures." Harold remained silent. Not react, nor did he get angry. He simply took the old badge from his pocket and placed it on the table, as if to say without words, "I once wore this into battle, and now it is not enough to keep a promise." The man across from him avoided eye contact, then bowed his head, just slightly, just enough that only Harold would notice. not out of respect, but as if he knew things had now gone beyond the point of no return. Harold said nothing more. He returned to the waiting area, pulling along his worn suitcase. Flight 1072 had still not taken off, but not due to technical issues. The tension was no longer about a man being denied. It had become a slow-burning fire, waiting to erupt. 10 minutes later, the intercom repeated, "Flight 1072 to Charlotte remains delayed. Passengers please await further updates from airport operations." No explanation, no mention of the incident. No one said Harold's name. But the crowd did not stay silent, not with shouting or anger, but with phones. The live stream was still running across multiple platforms. A 57-second clip showing Harold quietly placing his old badge on the counter had been edited into a 30-second version with one caption, "A soldier returns in a coffin." The only one who asked to go with him was denied because he did not have a ticket. The clip spread like wildfire. On TikTok, hundreds of versions were shared with slowed-down audio to highlight Harold's expression. People were not just watching it, they were turning it into a symbol. On Twitter, the hashtag #LetHimFly hit the top 5 within 40 minutes. By 9 o'clock in the morning, it was trending #1 nationwide. One political account reposted the video with the caption, "Is this how America treats its black veterans? No ticket, no right to say goodbye." Reddit exploded. In the group, AR Veterans, someone posted just one line I served with him. We called him Stonewall Harold. No one deserves this. Thousands of comments followed. Most of them outraged, others deeply moved. The American public, usually desensitized by daily controversies, this time remained quiet longer, then spoke together. Hundreds of people began canceling their tickets with the airline. Some were not even flying that day, but still called the customer line just to say they will not get another cent from me until they publicly apologize to that man. At the airport, no one said it out loud, but people began moving away from the gate, not to leave, but to stand with Harold. A middle-aged woman wearing a Women Veterans Association badge sat next to him and said, "I do not know you, but I know what it feels like to be treated like you are invisible. They are not allowed to do this to you." Online military influencers and political figures started to share the story. A senator from Pennsylvania tweeted, "We need to know which airline thought it was acceptable to deny a veteran the right to escort a fallen soldier because he lacked a reservation code. This is a national disgrace." By mid-morning, the airline released its first official statement, posted to its website and social media. "We regret the public reaction to this morning's incident at the airport. We are reviewing internal procedures to ensure fairness for all passengers." That statement, instead of calming the public, poured fuel on the fire. Immediate reactions followed. "We do not need a review. We saw your procedures loud and clear. This is not a system error. This is a human choice. If he does not get to fly, then your airline should not fly either." Veterans who had served with Harold began messaging each other. They agreed to meet at the airport, not to protest, but to prove there are those who will never let a comrade fall a second time. Around 10 o'clock in the morning, as the hashtag #LetHimFly crossed 1 million mentions, something began to happen in Terminal B, a quieter part of the airport. Men began to appear one by one. None wore full uniforms, but each bore subtle signs: a faded camouflage cap, a lightweight field jacket with old patches, a pair of boots worn down at the heels. They did not introduce themselves. They just looked at each other and knew same foxhole. Some had served with Harold in Iraq. Some had been trained by him at Fort Benning. Some had never met him, but knew the story and felt that all too familiar pain of being treated like someone who no longer mattered. They entered the airport in silence. No slogans, no raised voices. They simply gathered near the airline's check-in desk. Each one pulled from their backpack a folded American flag, like the ones used at funerals, placed it over their hearts, and stood in formation. One man, tall, silver-haired in his 60s, walked to the counter. He wore a field jacket holding a sealed envelope. He handed it to the young agent and said, firmly but gently, an open letter from Harold Bennett's comrades. For your corporate office. No drama. But the young woman's hands trembled as she took it. The envelope was rushed upstairs to Airline headquarters. Inside it stated 3 clear points. Confirm Harold Bennett as a respected training officer honored by hundreds of those who served with him. Condemn the airline's decision to deny an escorting veteran. Demand a formal public apology, a replacement flight designated as an honor flight, a full policy review on the transport of fallen military personnel. By now, people began to gather around Gate B14, not just passengers, but those who came after reading the news, after watching the live stream. They did not need to know all the details. They just needed to see the way Harold sat, quietly holding the picture frame, and behind him, a line of veterans standing at attention like it was a real funeral service. No one smiled. A little boy tugged on his mother's hand and asked, "Why are they standing so still, Mommy?" The mother did not answer. She just placed her hand over her heart, then slowly nodded in Harold's direction. A young man, once a Marine, now in civilian clothes, stepped forward, took off his service badge, and placed it on Harold's suitcase. Said nothing. Then joined the line. That scene, no one planned it. No director could have choreographed it. It happened because some things, like loyalty, honor, and promises, do not need to be repeated to stay alive. The media began to arrive. But they kept their distance. No interviews, no microphones in Harold's face. They simply recorded, from afar, a line of people standing silently in the airport on a morning that was supposed to be about departures and arrivals just like any other day. Harold still did not speak, but for the first time that morning, he looked up. His eyes met the row of veterans standing in front of him, and he gave a small, subtle nod. Just one nod. But everyone understood he was no longer alone. A former officer, now the CEO of a small private airline, heard about the incident while in the middle of a strategic meeting at his company's southern headquarters in Atlanta. He was not a media personality. He did not appear in newspapers. But those who had once served under him remembered one thing: he never shouted orders. He acted. And when he saw Harold's face replaying in the now viral live stream, he knew I owe that man the respect of taking a stand. Within 5 minutes, the meeting was postponed. He stood up, took out his personal phone, and dialed the direct line to his flight operations director, "I need a crew, as fast as possible. Destination the airport where Harold Bennett is right now. No need for a reason, just honor." The aircraft deployed was a mid-sized jet, typically used for executive travel and relief teams, available for rapid dispatch. On the fuselage was the logo of a spread-winged eagle, the emblem of the division he and Harold had once fought for together. The flight crew had 3 members, all former military. When asked about the reason for the trip, the captain simply said, "We are not flying for business today. We are flying for a promise left unfulfilled." Around 10:40 in the morning, the airport received an emergency landing request from a private carrier. A sleek, silver-gray plane descended quietly. No sirens, no escort vehicles. Only one man stepped out dressed in a blue suit, holding a weathered cap in his hand. He did not head to the VIP lounge. He walked straight to Gate B14, where a man in a faded uniform was sitting surrounded by silent witnesses. He stopped in front of Harold, removed his cap, bowed his head, and said softly, "We cannot change the past, but please let us try to make the present right." No one spoke. The entire airport seemed to hold its breath. Harold looked at the former officer standing before him, once his junior, now reaching out with no pity, no pressure. Harold's eyes softened. Slowly, he placed a hand on his old suitcase and stood. To an outsider, it may have looked like a simple gesture, but to those who had served it was clear he had accepted the invitation of honor. As the two men turned and walked away, the crowd instinctively parted. No one took pictures. No one recorded. Only one man placed his hand over his heart. Then another followed. Soon the entire waiting area had formed a spontaneous formation, silent, solemn, full of gratitude. The small jet was waiting in a reserved zone. As Harold approached the entire crew, all three members stood at attention. No red carpet, no jet bridge, just a clean, simple olive green mat rolled out from the door to the plane. Harold stopped at the bottom of the steps, turned to look back at the terminal. The veterans were still there. No one said anything, but in everyone's heart, they understood. Sometimes one person stands, so the rest of us no longer have to bow our heads. The plane door closed. The captain turned to Harold and said clearly, "We have an honored guest on board, and a soul waiting to be brought home." The plane taxied away. No horn, only the quiet salute of those standing at the glass railing, hands raised, sending off a hero. And one last glance through the window from an old man watching his fellow soldiers, still standing like a guard of honor. Inside the cabin, Harold did not sleep. He sat leaning toward the window, still holding Marcus's photo frame, as if the boy might slip away at any moment. The flight lasted just over an hour, but for him, it felt like a lifetime. Because the last time he had flown with Marcus, the boy was alive, covered in mud at the training field, shouting, "Mission accomplished," and grinning awkwardly when Harold only nodded in reply. Now there were no shouts, just a silent wait for the boy to come home. The plane began to descend. Through the window appeared a peaceful stretch of land. Rolling hills, trees tinged with early autumn red, small white houses surrounded by vegetable gardens. A town Marcus had mentioned often in letters. A place where he said, "There is nothing grand here, but it is the only place I have ever wanted to come back to." The plane touched down just before noon. There was no red carpet, no welcome banners, only clear skies. A soft breeze and a group of people lined up along a side runway, quiet as a Sunday afternoon. Roughly 30 people, men, women, young and old. None of them knew Harold. None had ever met Marcus, but they knew today a son was coming home, and a man had kept a promise for the world. When the door opened, the crew exited first, all in simple uniforms, no insignia. Then Harold stepped out. He did not look toward the cameras because there were none pointed at him, only eyes watching him as if to say, loyalty does not die. A middle-aged man, a veteran from the area, stepped forward. He gave no speech. He simply extended his hand and said, "My name is Dwight. I lost a teammate in Afghanistan. Thank you for not letting Marcus come home alone." Harold did not shake hands right away. He looked at the man for a moment, then nodded, squeezing his hand gently, as if to say, "We never truly lose someone, as long as we remember them." A boy around 10 years old, wearing a t-shirt with the American flag printed on it, walked up nervously holding a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. He held it out, his hand trembling, his eyes wide. "Sir, are you Marcus's dad?" Harold looked at him, his eyes slightly misty. He knelt down, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, and said, "No, but I am the one who promised to bring him home." The boy bit his lip, pushed the bouquet into Harold's hands, and ran back to his mother. The air was still. A few quiet sobs came from the crowd, but no one spoke. The flight crew handed Marcus's photo frame back to Harold, then bowed in military fashion. A group of uniformed police and firefighters standing nearby also raised their hands in a collective salute. No one said, "Let's go." No one needed to. Harold held the frame tighter. And then, with heavy but steady steps, he joined the small motorcade, heading toward the place where Marcus would finally rest. It was not a long convoy, just a pickup truck carrying the casket, a support vehicle from the airline, and an old SUV where Harold sat in the back seat, the photo frame beside him. No sirens, no police escort. But as they rolled through the town's main street, small things began to happen. Engines shut off along the roadside. People stepped out of cafes. A mechanic, still in an oil-stained shirt, removed his cap and stood at attention next to a lamppost. No one had told them to, but something in the way that casket moved slowly down the street made people understand something sacred was passing by. When the procession arrived at the small military cemetery behind a white church, the sun was overhead. Under the autumn maple trees, wooden chairs had been set up. No tent, no podium. Just rows of American flags lining a red dirt path toward the burial site. Each flag fluttered gently in the wind, as if sending one final greeting to Marcus. Harold stepped out of the vehicle and made his way toward the open grave. In his hands was more than just a frame. It was the gaze of dozens of people watching, many of whom had never known Marcus, but now felt as if they had lost something of their own. A local pastor read a short prayer. No fancy words, no dramatic voice. Just a few heartfelt lines ending with, "God never asks who has the right to say goodbye. He only asks who still remembers to keep a promise." As the casket was lowered, Harold did not look away. He watched, like a father seeing his child off to basic training. But this time, it was the final journey. He did not cry, but his hand trembled slightly as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn item. Marcus's old military dog tag, faded from years of wear. He leaned down and placed it on the flag-draped casket, then stood at attention, saluting the way real soldiers salute, not textbook perfect, but carrying within it both the past and a final farewell. A high school student stepped up and whispered, "Were you his family?" Harold did not answer right away. He looked at the boy and offered the faintest smile. A young soldier standing beside him answered in his place, "No." He was more than that. After Marcus's funeral, the small town where he was laid to rest fell into an unusual hush. No honking horns, no dogs barking from the backyards of gray wooden houses. The entire neighborhood seemed to bow its head in a long shared silence. No one said anything, but everyone understood. At the corner bakery, the shop owner took down the menu board and replaced it with a handwritten sign, "Do not ask what I am serving today. Tell me the last good thing you witnessed." The story spread without newspapers, without social media. It traveled through whispers in the barbershop, in conversations at the farmer's market, through the small church on Sunday mornings, until finally it settled into the town's quiet transformation. A high school teacher shared, "Before, the kids never cared much about the morning flag ceremony. But yesterday the class was completely silent. One student asked to say Marcus's name. Another asked, 'Can we sing the national anthem again, please?' At the public library, a new notebook was placed next to the history shelf. On the first page was a question, 'What did you learn from Mr. Harold?' The first person wrote that sometimes silence is no longer a choice. The second wrote that an ordinary person can make an entire town rethink how they live. A group of local veterans, young and old, organized a conversation at the town hall. There was no agenda, but when the first man took the microphone, he simply said, "I used to think I no longer had a role to play. But that day when I saw Harold stand still and bring an entire airport to a stop, I knew as long as we live, we have a responsibility." Church was fuller than usual that Sunday. The pastor never mentioned the airline or the refusal. He just quietly quoted one line from his sermon that made the room hold its breath. They said he had no ticket, but he had something no system can scan, a promise. A 9-year-old child brought a drawing to school, Marcus lying beneath a flag and Harold standing beside him saluting. Above them in messy handwriting the words, "He kept the promise." The teacher did not correct the grammar. She taped the drawing beside the classroom flag. Whispers began about renaming the red dirt road leading to the cemetery. At first, many resisted. Would that be too much? But after a 3-hour town meeting, a retired plumber stood and said, "If one man could make this town fall silent for 3 days, then his name deserves a road." A vote was taken. Vote was 87% agreed. 1 week later, a new sign was raised. Not flashy, just a piece of plain wood hand-carved with the words, "Bennett Way, the road of the Promise Keeper." By the time that sign went up in Marcus's hometown, Mr. Harold had already returned to his. He took no photos, made no speeches, did not know that the sign was causing people to pause and bow their heads every time they passed it. His life had not changed much, at least on the outside. He still worked at the small shop behind the corner grocery fixing old coffee vending machines for gas stations, hospitals, and offices. Every morning he arrived early, opened the door, wiped down the parts drawer, tested the water heater, and tightened each screw. No one came to watch. But after the day he brought Marcus home, something in the air had shifted. The delivery guy started staying longer, just to sit in silence for a few minutes. A young nurse came to pick up a machine and placed a small box of thank you cards on the table. "We raised money to fix the hospital coffee machine, but really, we just wanted to thank you for keeping your word." A little boy who once gifted him a model airplane still visited every weekend. One day he asked Mr. Harold after everything, "Do you feel like you changed?" Harold smiled but did not answer right away, then said slowly, "No, I am still the same, but the world around me seems to have learned to slow down and listen a little more." In the corner of his workbench, a photo of Marcus hung, unframed, unlit. Beneath it, a small sticky note. "As long as someone remembers, he is not really gone." A local high school invited him to speak to the senior class. The topic, honor, and the things not taught in textbooks. He came. No slides, no uniform. He told just one story, from beginning to end, in a slow, even voice, without any dramatic moments. When a student asked, "What should I do to be like you?" he replied, "Do not be like me. Just do not stay silent when your heart tells you not to." After the talk, a student left a note in the school's mailbox. "For the first time, I understand a regular person without power or wealth can still change someone's life just by keeping a promise." One day, Harold received a package from the East Coast. Inside was a small handmade book by students. On the cover, Harold, the man who stood still and made the system stop. The New York Times sent a request for an interview. CNN wanted to produce a documentary. He declined them all. On his work table, he placed a small wooden plaque with hand-carved words, "I did not do it to be remembered. I just did not want Marcus to be forgotten." Someone once asked if you could do it all over again, would you? He did not lift his head from the coffee filter he was cleaning, just said, "If I could do it again, I would do it sooner." One Monday morning, he opened the shop later than usual. The delivery driver waited and asked why. Harold said today is Marcus's birthday. "I just needed a few minutes to remember." That afternoon on his way home, a group of college students were practicing guitar near the park. One of them asked, "Mr. Harold, I heard about Marcus. But really, I want to know why you never gave up." He replied, "Because I have seen too many people stay silent. And I know, not every time will there be someone left to keep the promise." Mr. Harold never appeared on television, but his story, even though he never told it himself, continued to grow like a seed rooted too deeply to be buried. The first person to share it was a senior journalism student. She had followed the airport live stream from the beginning and could not forget the image of the black man holding a picture frame stopped at the boarding gate. Her article, posted on a personal blog with the simple title, "The Last Escort," was shared more than 1 million times in just 3 days. No clickbait headlines, no exclusive interviews. Just one opening line that cut to the heart of decency. He did not need to fly, but he flew, by making it impossible for the rest of us to look away. From there, local news outlets began to recall the event. Then, national networks followed. One major channel ran a special report titled, "The Man Who Kept the Promise." The anchor did not have to say much. They simply replayed the moment Harold was stopped at security and the sentence captured loud and clear. "I am not his family, but I am the last one who knew who he was." After the program aired, the station's phone lines were overwhelmed. Thousands of viewers sent handwritten letters, a rare thing in the digital age, saying they cried not out of anger, but shame. "We have let too many right things be smothered by processes that seem harmless." He did not raise his voice, but he made us listen. A teenager once planning to drop out to chase a get-rich trend wrote Harold a letter. "I used to think success meant being loud and moving fast. Now I just hope someday I can stand still, long enough to not leave anyone behind." A Pulitzer-winning author declared, "I scrapped a novel I had been working on for years, because this story reminded me that ordinary people can still change the times." An indie musician composed an acoustic piece titled "Empty Gate B14." It never charted, but it played on repeat at memorials for unclaimed veterans. People began sharing it with the hashtag #LetThemFlyTogether. At a small church in Idaho, the pastor rewrote his entire Sunday message. "I am not here to speak of life after death. I am here to speak of the kind of death that comes when we live without keeping our word." A high school in Chicago hosted an assembly titled "Do Not Stay Silent for What Is Right," where students shared stories about everyday people who had the courage to speak up. The first story they told was about Harold Bennett. No one knows exactly what Harold thought of all this, but when someone handed him a printed copy of that first article, "The Last Escort," he turned straight to the final paragraph, folded it up, and said, "As long as they remember Marcus, the rest does not need to be said." The spread of the story eventually forced the one place that had once been the epicenter of silence to finally speak up: the airline that had turned Mr. Harold away. At first, they remained defensive. A short statement was released saying, "We are reviewing internal security procedures to ensure no errors occur in the future." That response was met with immediate backlash. The public was not asking for a protocol. They were demanding the truth. An independent newspaper released an internal investigation revealing that just last year there had been at least 4 cases of military body escorts, all involving white individuals, none with QR codes, and all were allowed to proceed without issue. Soon after, an anonymous email from an airline employee was leaked. The subject line read, "We knew we were wrong, but no one dared to say it." In the letter, the author confessed that morning no one had the courage to speak the real reason, because to do so meant admitting we could not accept a black man in a worn uniform standing next to the priority boarding gate. The hashtag #HeWasStopped because he was black quickly trended across Twitter, TikTok, and Reddit. Many black veterans began posting photos of times they were turned away, not for security reasons, but for not meeting the appearance standards. a national veterans organization filed an official petition with the Department of Transportation demanding an investigation into systemic racial bias within the airline industry, especially concerning fallen soldiers. Military families wrote public letters. We cannot allow silence to strip the honor from those who gave their lives, not because of their skin color, not because of missing paperwork, but because they were human. One photo went viral, a black mother holding the ashes of her son at an airport, standing in front of a priority check-in sign. She said, "I do not need priority. I just want to be treated like someone whose son died for this country." Eventually, the airline's board chairman, a veteran himself, appeared at a special press conference. He did not read from a script. He did not blame the staff. He simply bowed his head and said, "We did not just turn away a man. We turned away a piece of this country's memory. And that cannot be fixed by a statement. It can only be fixed by action." That same week, the airline established a military escort assistance fund named Let Them Fly Fund. All paperwork requirements were simplified. No more QR codes, no more corporate emails, commercial tickets, or system confirmations. One thing was now enough: a military escort permit issued by the Department of Defense. A new area was designated at the very airport where the incident occurred, the former Gate B-14, renamed Marcus Gate, for those who never flew alone. There was no grand opening, no ribbon cutting, just a metal plaque with the inscription, "This gate once turned away a man, and awakened an entire nation." Beneath it, the only remaining photo from that day, Mr. Harold standing alone holding the picture frame. The airport coordinator shared, "Now whenever a fallen soldier is returned, we send the escort flight out from that exact gate. And every time someone quietly shows up to salute, no one is told to do it, but everyone knows they should, because the silence from that day now has an answer." People often believe you need power to change anything, but the story of Harold Bennett shows sometimes one person standing still at the right moment can make an entire country speak. He did not knock on newsroom doors. He did not post rebuttals. He did not file lawsuits. He just stood, did not walk away, did not bow, and did not leave behind the one who had fallen. Harold was not Marcus's biological father. He was not paid to escort him. He had no reason to take on an entire system of indifference, but he did, because to him keeping a promise was not negotiable. When asked, "Why did you not give up?" he simply said, "Because I once stayed silent, and I know sometimes there is no one left to speak." That silence, in the end, made an airline bow its head. It made an entire country reconsider how it treats those who wore the uniform, who fought, and who returned. In a flag-draped coffin, the airline paid the price, not just in money, not just in reputation, but in a long overdue admission to justice. We turned away a part of our national memory, and that cost, without someone like Harold, may have never been acknowledged. But deeper than that, the real lesson does not live at the airport or on the nameplate that reads Marcus Brown. It lives in each of us. This story is not just about Marcus. It is about every time we see something wrong and look away. Every time we witness someone being treated unfairly and do not ask why Harold was not the only one who had ever been turned away. But he was the one who did not let that be the end of the story, and because of that, others in the future may not have to stand alone. One foggy morning, Harold walked to the post office and mailed a small package. Inside was a single handwritten note for the next person, the one who will be stopped from boarding. "Please do not stand alone." The recipient was an organization supporting Black veterans who have been denied their rights. There was no name on the return address, but everyone knew where it came from. If you have made it to this point, do not let this story stop at just feeling something. Share it, not for the video, but because there was probably a time in your life when you needed someone to keep a promise for you. Write a thank you note, take action, or simply do not stay silent when you see something wrong. And if you ever ask yourself, I am just an ordinary person, what can I really do? The answer is, you do not need to do something grand. You just need to not step over someone who is being forgotten. Harold had no stage, no social media account with millions of followers. But he had something this era desperately needs: the courage to stay true to what is right, even when no one else is standing with you. You can be the one to say, let him fly. You can be the one who turns back, not away. And sometimes one sentence, one action, is enough to hold on to a piece of honor that was on the verge of being lost. Because honor does not live in nameplates. It lives in how we treat those who no longer have a voice. So keep this story in your heart and carry it with you whenever you stand before a choice to stay silent or to step forward. Because sometimes one single step can change what no one else dared to challenge for decades. And if you want to continue the journey with stories like this one, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, so you never miss a story again. We will bring you the stories of those who never needed a weapon, never needed a title, but through kindness and a simple promise, they made the whole world bow its head.